Hi, and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around on Science Fiction Saturday once more, we're looking at post-apocalyptic 1980s movies. I'm not talking about your George Miller, Mel Gibson, Mad Max things. I'm talking more low rent, cheapo, 1980s post-apocalyptic movies that have got a little bit of fun, a little bit of riz to them. First off, from 1985, so you know it's good, we have Albert Pujols' Radioactive Dreams, starring Michael Dudikoff and John Stockwell. Then we're going to go a little bit further forward to 1988, which was a great year for the star of this movie. And we're going to look at Hell Comes To Frogtown, starring Roddy Piper, Sandal Bergman, and William Smith. And because I'm doing 1980s post-apocalyptic movies, I thought I would record this in the man cave, which is the closest setting I've got to a post-apocalyptic 1980s place. Some would say it's overkill, but we'll deal with what we've got. So Radioactive Dreams, 1985, post-apocalyptic movie that has a real love for 1940s film noir and detective movies. The characters are named after 1940s detectives. You've got Philip and Marlowe. You've got a character called Rusty Mars. You've got, well, it's actually Philip Chandler and Marlowe Hammer, played by John Stockwell and Michael Dudikoff. You got Lisa Blunt playing a kind of femme fatale called Miles Archer. And we've got characters called Hammer and Chandler. So someone's got love for the 1940s film noir and that Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler kind of aesthetic. And there's even a voiceover at the start by Philip. And with any of these movies, you've got to get a couple of heavy hitters in just to fill out the cast list. And in this case, we have George Kennedy and Don Murray. So the movie starts in April 1st, 1986, when the nuclear war started. We all remember that. It was in the newspapers. It was all over the media. And a couple of kids are grabbed by people they think are their fathers and taken into a bomb shelter, and then they are left there by themselves for 15 years until April 1st, 2001, when Philip and Marlowe dig their way out of the bomb shelter into a cave where an old car has been left, and they go out and decide to explore the post-apocalyptic world. These guys have basically raised themselves listening to 1940s bebop and swing music on wind-up gramophones and reading detective novels. So their cultural milieu is detective novels. Get the car gassed up, leaving aside the idea of a car sitting idle for 15 years and then suddenly starting up when someone wants to use it. Leaving all those things aside, Philip and Marlowe decide to go out and explore the world. And the locations they use for the post-apocalyptic world outdoors are a whole bunch of volcanic plains in Hawaii. So there's no trees around, there's just dust and volcanic lava flows everywhere. And it works really well. It plays well to creating the world of the movie. They encounter a whole bunch of mutants, a bunch of female motorcycle mutants, with red wigs covering bald heads, and they fight them off. They also encounter some disco mutants who are basically little kids in disco suits like John Travolta wore in Saturday Night Fever, with scatological vocabularies and pistols. Along the way, they pick up and assist two women. Miles Archer, played by Lisa Blunt, is not reliable. She accidentally leaves with them the keys to the last nuclear weapon in the world. Though why anybody would need a nuclear weapon in a post-apocalyptic hellscape is kind of inexplicable, but on the other hand, this is the MacGuffin holding the plot together. They also find another woman called Rusty Mars, whose parents have been killed by the disco mutants, and they help her, and Rusty becomes Philip's love interest in the movie. She takes them to Edge City, the last city in the world, which is full of a whole bunch of different pop culture tribes. There are greasers there are hippies there are punks, there are indescribable groups of people who have clustered around pop cultural ideas. There are gangs, and Philip and Marlowe are particularly prized people to kidnap because, unlike most other meat in the world, they are not contaminated by radiation or by chemicals or anything else. They are prime rib and almost get eaten by a butcher. These guys have got no clue. They're totally clueless. Philip is a little more melancholy than Marlowe is. Marlowe's optimistic and There's a slight idea that he has an acquired brain injury that makes him a cheerful and optimistic person. He wants to be a dancer. Philip wants to be a magician and do stage magic, neither of which is a thing particularly useful in a post-apocalyptic place like Edge City. They end up being fishes out of water in these weird alleyways of Edge City. The Edge City scenes were filmed in Mexico, and there's some real production value there. The budget was only $3 million, which wasn't a lot of money even in those days, particularly if you're doing locations in Hawaii. But it ended up making $7 million in the box office before it went to rentals on VHS, where it did incredibly well. Radioactive Dreams, every video shop had a copy of it. But there are some interesting themes that run through this movie that make it just that little bit more interesting than it might be otherwise. It runs a tight 98 minutes. And basically the movie is a coming-of-age story for these two guys. They've emerged into the world unprepared for it the way many, many young people aren't. They get into trouble, they make bad decisions, their love lives are all over the place, and it's partly about their loss of innocence, how they come to terms with the world in which they find themselves, how they learn to live with it, how they recover from the mistakes and move on, which is a kind of deep theme for this kind of movie. Though it's not particularly played incredibly strongly as a theme through the film, it's definitely there, and it's definitely something that leads up to the climax. It's also about finding your joy in life. It's about finding the things and the people that make life worth living for you. And that's another interesting theme that this movie lays out there for us. This is particularly hard for Philip because every betrayal hits him deeply, and he thinks there's nothing worth living for in the world. Yeah, that's a real thing that people feel at various times during their lives. Whereas Marlowe is much more optimistic and kind of clueless in a way. But his Candide-like cluelessness lets him survive and lets him move through his life. Once the plot's resolved, once they find out the true nature of the two men who put them into the bomb shelter just before the nukes went off, once they come to terms with things and once they get the keys to the nuclear weapon, Philip takes on Marlowe's always look on the bright side of life philosophy. And it ends with a dance number, the post-nuke shuffle, where Philip and Marlowe do a weird 1940s style hep cat dance.
You know, post-nuke shuffle.
It's a new beginning, the fighting's over.
With all the clueless and lost people of Edge City, all of their gangs have been got rid of because Philip and Marlowe snookered them into destroying one another. And so all of these young people have got no direction. And these two goofy guys who were in a bomb shelter for 15 years just danced their way through all of the people in Edge City and into a brighter future. It's an underrated film from my point of view. There's some really good new wave pop music in it. Every track on it is, for the most part, sung and led by women. Sue Sard, Maureen Steele, Cherry Delight, The Mighty Colors, Sherry Sabas, Lisa Lee, Mary Ellen Quinn. There's a very female-led soundtrack to this movie, which did pretty well. And I know torrents of the MP3s of the soundtrack do very, very well. I haven't really checked for most of the tracks to see whether they're on Spotify, but I've tried with a couple of tracks and they're not on Spotify. But it's a very strong soundtrack, and the songs in the soundtrack act as a motif underneath the action of the scenes. So when Philip and Marlowe have a setback, there's a song that plays as a montage shows on the screen, just underlining the narrative in an interesting way that most of these movies, these VHS era movies from the 1980s, just simply didn't do. The stars John Stockwell, who had a bit of a career, he was in My Science Project with Dennis Hopper around the same time. Michael Dudikoff, who later went on to be a kind of B-picture action guy. Lisa Blount is in there, and she ended up being a producer and actually produced a couple of movies that were nominated for Oscars in this century. Don Murray, who had been in movies in the 1950s and 1960s and starred in Bus Stop with Marilyn Monroe. George Kennedy, who won a Best Supporting Actor Oscar for Cool Hand Luke about 20 years before this movie and was probably wondering where his career went. So there's a solid cast in here, and all of them deliver, even though the movie itself is basically a cheapo made-for-dinner little renters entertainment group, the DEG, and Albert Pune, who was known to be a kind of Z-grade action guy, but whose movies are starting to be reevaluated now, and people are finding a nostalgic fondness for them, and people who are discovering them now are finding interesting aspects to Albert Pune's movies that maybe we didn't realize in the 1980s. It's a wonderfully archetypal 1980s post-apocalyptic, slightly humorous, very weird, very zeitgeisty science fiction movie. In the 1980s, a lot of people were watching the high-end stuff with Spielberg and Lucas and Gremlins and movies like that, the big tentpole movies. But for most of us, the stuff that really gave us joy were these lower-budget VHS weekly release films. They didn't have the artificiality of the big-budget Spielberg and Lucas stuff. These ones are more punk. These ones were more new wave. They're more zeitgeisty in the 1980s than any of those much larger films that people still worship for reasons best known to who the fuck knows. So I watched Radioactive Dreams again this week. I've actually seen it back in the day. We used to watch it in groups of people at parties, and people loved them. And people loved the post-nuke shuffle at the end of the movie, and the Zim Bim Zowie and all that kind of stuff. It really was a movie for the people. So I watched that today again, and I just fell in love with it all over again. And then I went to a 1988 American science fiction movie starring Roddy Piper, who I talked about last week with They Live. Made in the same year, 1988, as They Live, but not for as much money. The budget was $1.5 million. And it's the mad and totally unrealistic and surreal at times Hell Comes to Frogtown, where Roddy Piper plays Sam Hill, one of the few men in the world after the nuclear apocalypse who is still shooting tadpoles. He's shooting tadpoles at an Olympic level, and that makes him very important to the government of the US, such as it is in this post-nuclear era. It's mostly a matriarchy because most of the guys got killed in the war, and people who are fertile, whether they're men or women, are of high value to society because there's an arms race to get people born and bred again so that they can continue the nuclear war sometime in the future. It's got a very cynical idea of post-apocalyptic politics, but we're going to let that happen. Like the first movie, this has got one of the things that I don't like in post-nuclear apocalyptic movies, and that is when they show you the montage of nukes going off. They've all got sounding rocket contrails at the side of the nuclear weapons, those vertical contrails, where during nuclear tests in the 1950s, the US military launched these rockets up vertically with contrails that stayed visible for a long time, so that when the nukes went off, they could measure the blast of them and the way it distorts these contrails. So they were put either side, from the camera's point of view, of the nuclear weapon, so that when the nuclear blast dissipates the contrails of the sounding rockets, they can make measurements based on that. But in a nuclear war, you wouldn't have sounding rockets. You'd just have the nukes going off. And so all of those movies, and it's in dozens of movies, where they use stock footage of nuclear blasts, there are always those sounding rocket contrails alongside the nukes. And it always takes me out of the movie. Creation of the Humanoids does it. Both of these movies do it. But because I like them, I'll allow it. After the late 20th century nuclear war, which happened because the Russian Empire never fell in these universes, you got a post-apocalyptic American government, and you've got a whole bunch of areas which are populated by humanoid, mutant amphibians, the frogs of the title. In the movie, there's a nomadic scavenger called Sam Hill, played by Roddy Piper, and the provisional government sets him up as a human stud. They actually track him down because there are a trail of pregnant women behind him when he wanders around. And so the government catch him by following the trail of knocked up women.
Now, MedTech's main assignment is to locate and impregnate fertile women in the wastelands. Now we need potent young men in the fields to assist in this great work. Men who can take care of themselves, who know the territory, who can perform under difficult conditions. Do you feel up to it?
Are you serious?
So they put him in a cybernetic codpiece, which does allow him to whiz. But it's also got a lock on it. It's got a bomb placed on it so that if he wanders too far away from his handlers, first off, he will get an electric shock in his junk. Not in a lovely way. And then if he gets too far, not good. He's not happy about this, even though he signed up for it. And so they send him on a mission. There are a whole bunch of fertile women who have been kidnapped and taken to Frogtown. And he has to go with a small team to Frogtown to A, rescue the women, and B, knock them up, because you've got to populate the world again. The two people he's sent to Frogtown with are a military officer called Spangle, played by Sandahl Bergman. And Sandahl Bergman, I really like as an actress and as a dancer. She worked for Bob Fosse as a dancer 3 times. The third time, she did the Take Off With Us musical number in All That Jazz, which if you've seen it, you'll remember Sandahl Bergman in that. She also was in one of the Conan movies. Didn't have as good a career as she should have had, because she was an interesting and striking actress, and she was a dancer as well, and she looked spectacular. She was 6 foot tall, which is probably why her career didn't stay at the top level, because there weren't many lead actors who are 6 foot tall. The other person they're sent with is another military woman called Sentinella, played by Cess Verrill, who is pretty good with a mounted machine gun. There is a military officer that works against them, a guy called Captain Devlin, played by cult movie legend William Smith, who was in any number of cult movies. He did Hollywood Man, a very interesting movie he made himself. He was the main antagonist in Darker Than Amber with Rod Taylor, the adaptation of John D. MacDonald's Travis McGee book. Really great, striking character actor. He was kind of the Leo Gordon after Leo Gordon. And there's also an old prospector, because in a desert scene you need an old prospector. A guy called Looney Tunes, played by Rory Calhoun, who was in any number of cowboy movies and other movies. He did Pepper movies as well in the 1950s and 1960s. And his career kind of went downhill because they found out he had a criminal record, and that mattered to people at the time. The movie's got a tongue-in-cheek tone to it. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot less serious than They Live. And Roddy Piper plays the character kind of okay. He actually had an acting coach while he was making this movie. And this was made just slightly before he did They Live for John Carpenter. So this was him basically on training wheels. But he's a lot of fun, very cynical. The movie, as it ended up being made, is a lot less sleazy than it was originally going to be. The original script had a lot more male gaze and nudity and things like that in it. But when they got Sandahl Bergman to play Spangle, they had to do it as a union movie. It wasn't going to be non-union anymore. So the budget doubled to $500,000, which was a high budget for a movie that was intended to go directly to video. New World Pictures distributed it and had the production rights. So New World decided, we're going to make it a feature film. We're going to put it into cinemas, which indeed they did. But to do that, we want to up the production value a bit. So they increased the budget and took it up to $1.5 million. And the production values are there. A lot of it was filmed in the California deserts. The climax is filmed at Vasquez Rocks, the iconic location for this kind of movie. There are 2 locations that are iconic in science fiction and other genre films in California. Well, 3 if you count the Alabama Hills, where Bob Baedeker did the renowned westerns. But apart from that, you've got Bronson Canyon and you've got Vasquez Rocks. And this one does Vasquez Rocks. Any movie that has Vasquez Rocks in it is about 20-30% better than it would be otherwise. Spangle and Sentinella and Sam Hill wander into the Frog Reservation and end up being captured by the head frog, Commander Toti, who makes human females. He's got a thing for human females. He's a little bit on the kinky side. He makes human females do the Dance of the 3 Snakes. And we find out, without ever seeing it, what the Dance of the 3 Snakes means. Because Spangle is captured by them and has to do the Dance of the 3 Snakes. It's very much tongue-in-cheek. The whole Frogtown thing is in some ways a slight pastiche of Casablanca. There is a frog who runs a strip club and bar called Leroy. And he's kind of Sydney Greenstreet because he runs this bar. He's got a fez on, and he's kind of neither a protagonist or an antagonist. He's just a businessman. And I kind of like the fact that they put a frog in a fez there and had that little callback to Sydney Greenstreet. And they had the old prospector played by Rory Calhoun. There's lots of little subtle sillinesses in this movie that I think makes it good value. The frog makeup was made for only $12,000 out of the budget, which is, not a lot of money, but it's kind of effective. There's a female frog called Arabella, played by Christy Summers, who has the most elaborate frog makeup and turns out to kind of fancy Sam Hill. And there's some kind of dodgy things around the relationship with Arabella and Sam Hill, which are kind of funny, but you feel slightly guilty at laughing at them, which is the case in pretty much any 1980s movie you're ever going to watch. But I'm going to give you the slight spoiler. The good guys win. And the good guys win in a really interesting way. You got to love any movie that's got 3 frogs in a monster truck chasing people across the desert. There's nothing not to love in that particular scenario. And Hell Comes to Frogtown. It's not a perfect movie. It's flawed as hell. And it's all over the place. But it's fun. It generated a sequel in 1993 called Return to Frogtown, which didn't have any of the actors from the previous movie in it. I've seen it once, don't bother. And there's another movie from 1996 called Toad Warrior, which was later re-released as Max Hell Frog Warrior. And it was intended to be a standalone story, so they say. But it was obviously hanging off the legacy of Hell Comes to Frogtown. Check them out. Check both of these movies out. If you're of a certain age, you've probably seen them before. But it's worth revisiting them. And they're a lot of fun. They're silly, they're of their time, post-nuclear 1980s, slightly comedic and weirdly wonderful Z-grade movies that I could watch every few years and enjoy. They deliver entertainment. They're crazy in concept, both of them each in their own way. A couple of private eyes in a post-apocalyptic hellscape who don't know what they're doing. And one of the few fertile men in the world going in to rescue a whole bunch of beautiful women from frogs. You're not going to get that kind of movie in 2025. Nobody's going to sell that one to Netflix or Amazon or Apple Plus. It's really not going to fly in this era. But in that era, when they needed so much content and people had the money to do mad things, these movies were made, and I love them for that. So that's it for this time around. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Leave a comment, tell me whether you've seen these movies and whether you like them or not. I think at least one of them's on Tubi, maybe both of them. So you might want to go and do a bit of a search in Tubi if it's available in your area. Or any one of those kind of low market streaming services may well have these movies. I believe Hell Comes to Frogtown is on Australian Tubi still, and it should be treasured for that. If you want to help the channel out, you can also do that by becoming a channel member or by becoming a patron at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. Next up tomorrow, I'm doing the 4th video of my walk between Werribee and Melbourne, and I'm going to be going through some interesting landscapes. 6.5 kilometers of me just talking at a camera. What's not to love in that? Then we've got the Monday video coming out, and Wednesday's video, and then Science Fiction Saturday once more. And the little carousel goes around again. So until all of that stuff happens, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Watch some bad post-apocalyptic 1980s movies. One of which was described as Mad Max meets Planet of the Apes with frogs. And I'll catch you next time.